Thank you, everyone, for joining this episode of Real Talk, Real Trust. I'm Ryan Pacchini. I'm your host. I'm the CRO at CMS. The promise of this webinar series is helping digital leaders figure out how to build trust and a long-term connection with their prospects, their customers, their patients. With all the noise that's sort of in the market, the volume of digital content and experiences, at the end of the day, people work with organizations they trust, that they believe have their best interests in mind. And so today we're going to be talking about improving patient trust and engagement, a guide for providers. I'm thrilled to have Jessica Holton here, who is the CEO of Ars Privacy. I'm going to give her a moment to introduce herself. I also have Zane, our CEO, who has been a regular on the program. And I think we might be on episode 15, 16, 17, something along those lines. So now a long-standing series. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. But Jessica, would love to hear just a little bit about your background, a little bit about what Ars Privacy does to give context to our listeners, and just anything you might want to share about yourself and your company before we dive in for today.
Great, Ryan. Well, thank you so much for having me. And Zane, thank you for looping me into this. This is an awesome opportunity to chat with your listeners. So, by way of background, I'm Jessica, one of the co founders of Ars Privacy. And before Ars Privacy, which I'll get all into, we built a company called Ars, and it was a couples therapy platform first. And when we shifted from offering couples coaching to couples therapy, we became HIPAA compliant. And all of a sudden, overnight, everything about the way that we did marketing had to change because we were now HIPAA compliant. So we think about the data that we sent back to Facebook and to Google, which were our main sources of customer acquisition. That had to change, and our marketing costs skyrocketed. We were no longer efficient. When we think about A/B testing and experimentation and attribution and analytics and all of these tools that we had become accustomed to using before we were operating in a regulated space, it all had to change and we had to tear it all out. And so we ran into this problem that we couldn't find a solution for. We were trying to do what every modern marketing team does, which is, as you all know, use data to reach the right people, personalize the experience, measure what is working, iterating until it works even better. But because we were handling sensitive information and health information, the tool we were used to using were now off limits. And so this compliance exposure was very real. And the alternatives that we had to work with were extraordinarily limited. And they were really built for teams that were outside of marketing teams. So we ended up building this solution for ourselves, which stripped data of health information and identifying information before shipping it off to third-party platforms. It ultimately became something that the entire healthcare industry needs. And so we pivoted to focus on Ars Privacy. And today, Ars Privacy is a HIPAA compliant marketing platform that gives healthcare organizations the ability to use that data through compliant infrastructure, AI powered tools that you actually need to compete without the legal and compliant risk. So we're purpose built. We serve healthcare companies from digital health all the way through publicly traded companies, hospitals, health systems, and we help bring marketing into the modern era and make sure that you're reaching more patients, but doing so in a privacy forward way.
Jessica, thank you for that. I love the story of how you started as a couples therapy solution all the way to an engine that's going to empower modern providers to be able to communicate and engage with patients in a way that it feels like they would expect in sort of all other areas of their life and the kind of digital experiences that they're receiving. So excited to hear a bit more about that. And I'm sure that we'll learn about some of the nuances in our discussion. Zane, do you want to give a quick intro for our listeners? Not that you need any introduction at this stage, but would love to hear just maybe a bit about your role as well as what you're excited about for in terms of this discussion today. I know this was a topic that was high on the list.
For sure. Yeah, thanks Ryan for obviously organizing another episode here. Jessica, pleased to have you join us. As the CEO at .cms, the company itself obviously is 25 years old, but I came into this position almost 4.5 years ago. And since then, we have really been focusing on, the regulated industries. And Jessica, everything you mentioned is really top of mind for us. We are constantly engaging with our customers in financial services, healthcare, government. These are the main industries that we're working with. And to your point, data privacy, governance, compliance, it's a constant theme. So super excited to have you and learn how how Arch Privacy is also obviously tackling some of these challenges, but just to gain insight in the industry itself.
Thanks, Zane. One of the things that I know I was personally excited about was just the marrying of content and data is sort of the foundation of every digital experience. And we always have taken this compliance and governance layer to how we think about content, and hearing about your perspective around how it impacts data is sort of the marriage that I think a lot of the providers that we talk to, we work with some very, very big providers that have 500 digital properties, some that have 70, 80 that are trying to figure this out. And it's a complex equation. So I think, Jessica, it's part of the journey of being on Real Talk, Real Trust is to sit through rapid fire, and it's just to get you ready for the depth of the conversation. So I'm just going to ask a few questions. The premise of rapid fire is in the name, which is rapid. So no 3, 4, 5 sentence answers, just as brief as you can be. What's the biggest area AI is having an impact when it comes to patient engagement?
Going from reactive and reporting that takes maybe weeks to uncover issues and then let alone handling issues to predictive, getting a lot faster to being able to cater to not only getting patients to come back in, but also to reach the right patients and to make our campaigns effective before we could even see the actual downstream impacts. So moving from reactive to predictive.
Excited to get into that more. Great start to your rapid fire. Zane, how about for you? The biggest area you're seeing AI is having an impact on, let's say, patient engagement. I know you work with our customers across regulated industries, but maybe narrow it to patient engagement or something adjacent. What do you think the biggest
Yeah,
AI
from
trend is?
our perspective, obviously we're more closer to the content operations of providers. So from that perspective, I feel the biggest impact is on content operations. There's a significant amount of content debt, outdated stuff, not audited properly. So obviously AI has a big impact on making sure that all your content is not only compliant but also current. And hopefully we will try to go down the path of helping these providers with personalization future forward, but we're not there yet. Hopefully, we will be in the coming days and months.
Absolutely. Just sort of a fun question for our listeners, for someone who's been in the healthcare space for a while. What would you say is the most recognizable healthcare brand and why?
There are so many, and I think it's hard to pick just one. I would say Mayo Clinic, but I think because it's not just the reputation about Mayo Clinic, but I think the trust that Mayo Clinic has, the name associated with Mayo Clinic is really high quality expertise. And that trust that they have built with patients and just the overall brand is the hardest thing to build. And it takes a long time to be able to do that at scale. And so I think when you hear Mayo Clinic, you equate that with really high quality.
That's a great answer. I love the idea of longevity, right? Because that's a
Mhm.
series of interactions over a long time that got to that status and outcomes that they've delivered. Being an East Coaster, I would have said John Hopkins, but we'll leave that for another day. I think there's
That's a great
similar
one too.
there's similar reasons for the strength of that brand. Jessica, I'm gonna give one more for rapid fire on in the healthcare arena, and then one other that I like to ask. What's the most interesting trend in your mind when it comes to patient engagement today?
So I'm super biased, but I think consent as a competitive advantage and being privacy forward as an advantage rather than a restriction. So for years, privacy and complying with regulation was seen as something that you have to check the box with compliance or that your legal and compliance team is telling you what to do. Now, I think that smart healthcare orgs are realizing that patients who choose to share their data engage more, they convert better, they stay for longer, and it can be seen as consent and privacy. The way that the healthcare orgs treat your data can actually be seen as a strength and a reason to go and trust with that healthcare org rather than just checking the box and doing it for compliance sake. So earning that trust, I think, outperforms buying attention or certainly is no longer just a restriction. Like it can actually be used as an advantage.
It's a perspective flip, it sounds like, versus it being a
Mhm.
risk.
Totally.
It's an opportunity to figure out what a patient wants, what they need, how they want to be engaged, all those sorts of things, if that's put at the forefront. So I love that. Um, we're going to change gears, Jessica. You are a new mom.
I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is it's a loaded question with a bunch of different answers, and there's no or wrong answer. What is the one piece, just one, of advice that you would give to new parents who are about to have a child, knowing that you're a few months into the journey?
I'm going to give two. One is very tactical. I know you
Said
said one.
as a new parent giving two. Perfect.
One is to have a sense of where you want to be going, but be very okay to modify that plan, not only within the given week or month, but also within the given hour or minute. So, for example, when every single night it seems that we have a different plan for how we'll put my daughter to bed to try to get long stretches of sleep as much as possible. And we're almost 11 weeks in, so we're still very much in the figuring it out mode when it comes to sleep. And every single night we have a different plan. And we say, we're putting her to bed this time. When she wakes up at this time, here's what you're doing, here's what I'm doing. But it changes depending on the context. And so, we can have all the parenting philosophies we want, but we have to be adaptable and flexible. And
Great
then,
one.
secondly, from a tactical perspective, I would just say protect your early time as much as you possibly can. And that's not just physically. Um, so that you can heal physically as someone who gave birth, but also mentally and emotionally. And we talk a lot about healing and the like dinner sized plate wound that is on your uterus that needs to heal. And that's absolutely true. I also think it's such a unique time period where you're hopefully celebrating, but maybe not celebrating, but really having this moment of your life has completely changed and having that moment to honor and to protect your little bubble of your now baby and you and your family and the people that you choose to let in. I think it's a very unique and special time. So see it as that and protect it as much as you possibly can.
Wow. Great advice, Jessica. Thanks.
Thanks.
Some wise words,
Like a
11 weeks.
seasoned first time mom, right?
I'm not a new parent, but I got so many insights myself.
Yeah,
Oh,
as
thank you.
one who has three girls, I take some of it, and I think it's actually an interesting kind of segue to just the idea of what we're going to talk about today. That healthcare is so personal, and it's so important to each of our lives because the baseline of health is critical for us to thrive and to give back to society and all those sorts of things. And I think for each of us, there's commonalities in our journey as a patient and now being on as a solution provider for the industry. You've had a chance also to take a step back and kind of build a strategy around what providers need to engage patients. Can you give us some insights in sort of your study in building a solution, what a typical patient journey looks like and what some of the key milestones are in that journey?
Definitely. So I mean, we come from a consumer oriented background. So I see a lot of parallels in healthcare that I saw in consumer. So today, patients shop for healthcare the same way that they shop for everything else, right? We get ads on TikTok, on Instagram, on Google when we search, that indicate to us not only maybe a solution to a problem that we've been searching for, but also that maybe we have something that we should be paying attention to that maybe we haven't even surfaced as a problem in our healthcare lives, that we should now look at solving. So we're Googling symptoms, we're reading reviews. They matter a lot to selecting care. We're comparing options that we have. We're soliciting input from experts, from friends before we even call an office. Gone are the days of just calling our GP and saying, hey, I'm having this issue. You come in or you get connected to a specialist and you just go to that specialist, right? We have so many options now, and we have really high standards for the care that we're looking to receive. So the digital experience that a health care company puts forward isn't just a nice to have. It's not that, you want to just make your patients feel nice, and if we do that, then they're a little bit happier. It's actually critical to the overall patient care, and it's really the first and only impression that a patient is going to get before they ever set foot into your office or into your virtual platform. So if any part of that digital experience, reading reviews or filling out a form or making a phone call or doing research, is clunky or slow or impersonal or just misses the mark from a branding and voice perspective, then the patient might already be looking at the next option. So I think the overall process of buying healthcare, because we have now so much choice and so much access, it's a lot harder on the patient to find the right fit. And it's also a lot harder for the healthcare org to find the right patient. And so, really honing in on just knowing that that patient journey of selecting the care has evolved quite a bit over the last several years and will continue to, especially as AI becomes such a
Huh.
determining factor of who we go to, is really important.
Yeah, Jessica, it's interesting the discovery process, and I've seen that shift. It's weird to say that when you think about it as you're taking care of your health and trying to find the right provider, but that really is what it is. It's discovery, and it's what is the experience you have with that provider, the feel that you have from that provider, and so as that patient research, let's call it, an initial engagement process has changed, what are the things that providers are struggling with in terms of keeping up with expectations on what a patient would want to see?
So I think, sitting from my point of view, I think compliance is one of them. And so what we see every day is that providers know that they need to show up digitally for their patients. But the tools that let them do that for healthcare, they weren't built for healthcare. So teams that are responsible, like the website teams, marketing teams that we talk to every day, those teams that are responsible for figuring out how to show up better digitally have a really hard job. Those teams often tend to be pretty small, and you have a lot of regulations, from HIPAA to state privacy laws to generally trying to be privacy forward and privacy focused. You have a lot to contend with. And so, as this patient engagement or patient journey is evolving, not only do these teams need to evolve as well and cater to an ever changing expectation around that digital journey, but you also need to do so in a compliant way. And so you end up with this gap that teams face between what they know they should be doing and what they actually can execute on safely, and then a lot of stalled action. So a team might have the best campaign or the best change to the onboarding flow that they could think of, but actually implementing that, they get stalled by the compliance questions, by, hey, how are we going to even figure out if this is working? Because we can't track, because so then analytics doesn't work for us.
Yep.
So I think really navigating these extremely rapid changes while remaining compliant is a really difficult thing to do. And I would say the fact that marketing teams and website teams tend to be really small within the healthcare org, but have a humongously important mandate, adds even more complexity on top of that.
Yeah, speed plus resources plus compliance. You
Yep.
put it all together.
Yes.
Zane, do you want to chime in on this? Like how have we talked about this? How have we seen this impact digital engagement with some of our clients, and what are some of the things that they're thinking about in terms of how they're adapting to the change in terms of patient engagement?
Yeah, no, I think not much that I can really add to what Jessica obviously elaborated on, but um, I do want to lean a little bit on, what Jessica mentioned, that there's just so much more like discovery right at the top of the funnel. Today's patients are coming in with so much more knowledge. So the gap between the content that a healthcare provider is providing, if that's outdated and if it's not meeting the expectation of the patient who has come in after ChatGPT and whatnot, like they would expect that content to be current and obviously accurate from a compliance perspective, but also current, which kind of takes me to the point that I was trying to make, which is the time to market for these teams that Jessica is mentioning, right? They're small teams. They have so much going on, and compliance is obviously a big, I guess, blocker. So having some kind of a technology platform, I wish I could think of one, but a platform that helps, let's say, a 50 hospital network have all these 50 different localized experiences, which is also required to build that trust, but also have compliance kind of native to it, right? It's not an extra work. It's just built into, your workflows, so that teams could go to market quickly instead of creating an IT ticket and then waiting on that content to be published on the website and then going to compliance. Like these workflows definitely need to be tightened and made far more efficient than they are today.
Yeah. See, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the things that was lightly touched on by both of you is this idea of reuse in a compliant way, reuse of insights about patients, and also reuse where in a compliant way, but also reuse of infrastructure and content and workflows, because that's a big part of how do you take something that, at least in our experience, we've seen in a network of providers that have a bunch of hospitals. The biggest hospitals get the most attention, and so how do you take the learnings from those hospitals and reapply them in a systematic and compliant way with essentially a governance layer at the core? And that's something that we've seen organizations struggle with: the pace of innovation plus the reuse of systems and technology across their different their network of providers. So I guess one thing that's sort of the future, I guess, as we think about the future, there's also tried and true principles in terms of how you engage patients, right? What are some of the things that are, for lack of a better term, Jessica, that are not going to change at their core, but they might evolve when it comes to building great patient experiences? What's tried and true?
Love that question. I think a couple of things, and they both dovetail into what you were saying, Zane. I think number one, at the end of the day, this will always remain true, is that patients in every industry, but particularly in healthcare, want to feel seen and understood and guided as a human being, a person, not processed. And I think that's true if the patient found you from Google versus, if they came in from a referral. Regardless, they don't want to feel like they're going through a flow that was built for just anyone who comes through the door. So I think the healthcare org that gets this right makes every single touch point make that patient feel understood, and that we are paying attention to that person and seeing them as an individual. And that goes to how we verify their insurance, right? And how billing plays a role into this, and how we hear how they came to us, what they're really concerned about when they come here. So I think understanding that that is a person in front of you is really, really important. And then secondly, how that kind of connects to marketing and how we measure the effectiveness of marketing is we as patients want to find the right service for us without too much having 5 different appointments or 5 different onboarding flows before we realize that this is actually not a good fit for me. And then from a healthcare organization's standpoint, we would much rather target, 20 really high quality patients than 200 top of funnel leads who actually have no reason to even be in our orbit or are not a
Yeah.
good fit for us. So being able to see the entire patient journey and really find out who are the right patients for us at the top of funnel, knowing that we want them to get to the very bottom of funnel, is really important. And then along that entire journey, making sure that we're not only tracking and analyzing who the right person is for us, but making that experience to the patient feel personal is really key.
Jessica, I like that because you started with this idea of like, hey, no one wants to be put through a single path because it's their
Yep.
health, it's personal. And then
Yep.
you sort of finished with, let's make sure we're engaging the people who we know that we can serve well, because the other side of healthcare is feeling like you're trying to help someone you shouldn't be trying to help, and that's messing with their individual health. So how do you marry those two things? And I think, Zane, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there specifically around what are the core things that that are going to essentially stand the test of time when it comes to patient engagement. Anything? I have one or two things on my mind, but I want to give you the floor first.
Yeah, just maybe start with what we already discussed, the accuracy and consistency of the content itself, and that ties into the whole compliance aspect. So I do believe that you do need a single source of truth, especially in a healthcare context. But then you also need what Jessica mentioned. You need some kind of personalization of experience. You don't want to be put through a process. So I think those two things, where you have a central source of truth, and then you build all these localized experiences on top of that. I think that,
So winning
for lack of a better
recipe.
word, architecturally, I think that would probably remain true, especially in healthcare.
Yeah. I agree, Zane. It's that feels like the two building blocks that need to be in place. The other thing that's a bit intangible that we've heard over and over again, which I think will be true, is that the organizations that providers partner with to deliver these experiences, there needs to be a baseline of experience and proven results, meaning no breaches, no challenges with uptime, no challenges with how the experiences are delivered, because most providers do not want to be the first, the second, the third, the fourth. Right? They want to show that you have a track record of managing data in a compliant way that delivers results, that you've delivered tens, hundreds of sites before. And I think that that's going to be true. Most of the core platforms that are being used to drive patient engagement have come from deep domain expertise like yours, Jessica, or long-term experience in the category that there's a proven history of results, not betting on the absolute newest technology because there's so much depth in understanding how the industry works. So let's keep moving. This might sound intuitive, but given both of your expertise and knowing what kind of results can come from doing it well, why is optimizing your digital content and having the right data platform so critical for delivering patient experiences? Jessica, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think so. You as a healthcare organization can become invisible at any moment, right? So a patient might be actively searching for a solution at 3 a.m. And if you show up at that exact moment, great. And then that patient might go away and stop Googling at 3 a.m. and come back to it, a couple of days later when they're like, okay, I really do need to figure this out. But if you don't show up at that moment again, then you, even though interacted with that patient when they were first Googling, they might go somewhere else at that point. So you need to show up when it matters, and you need to show up continuously when it matters to that patient. And so if you don't have a way of engaging that patient and also tracking that you're continuing to provide value to that patient throughout the entire user journey and being trusted and showing up when you need to show up, then it's really easy to just become forgotten or become invisible to that patient. And so, and then I would also just say from a compliance perspective, beyond acquisition, actually organizing what your patient journey is ahead of even going to the appointment or talking to a provider, knowing every step of that patient journey and how you want to engage with that patient is really important, because if they drop off, you want to find ways to bring them back in and to make sure that you're there when they need you.
Jessica, you gave a great sense of like, hey, you need to show up. You need to know when to show up. You need to have the right context when you show up. But there's a lot of variation in terms of how you would show up. So Zane, do you want to maybe talk about the impact of not having your content right in the context of the patient journey, both volume and maybe, the specific kind of content?
Yeah, I mean, that's goes back to what I mentioned earlier, right? Because you're operating in such a strict compliance environment, having a single source of truth for all your content, making sure that it runs through all your compliance checks. And then, you can also need localization of your brand and experience. So, when it comes to patient journeys, yes, you need to show up exactly at the right time with the right content. So it needs to be accurate. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be up to date, which is an entire content operation, which can be very, very significant lift. But on top of that, when you layer in the complexity of personalization, compliant or a compliant data, so this can be a tall order. And I would say, the technological decision behind it is fundamental. Some of the organizations that we work with do, have gotten the architecture right in that sense, that they have a single source of truth at the center, and then they're powering dozens, if not hundreds of varied experiences. This like multi-site technology that obviously we also are very much focused on.
Yeah, Zane, I couldn't agree that the compliance nature of how you deploy content, the workflows is critical. I guess maybe two other anecdotes that come to mind, which is we do work with an organization, not healthcare, but a compliance-led industry. Wouldn't be thought of as, let's say, a content engine, like a retailer, consumer goods company. They produced 40,000 pieces of content last year, which was a 10x year over year. from a very small content team. And they did that using AI, and had the workflows and governance that was built in. And what they told me was it was so important because they knew that the volume of content was growing with their competitive set. And so it was a cost of business in order to remain visible, which goes back to your original point, Jessica. Someone's doing the original search. They're using Claude, they're using Gemini, they're using ChatGPT to find who the next provider is. Those engines need to index a content database, a content management system to pull the information. The other piece is accessibility. So with the volume of content being created, ensuring that every piece of content is accessible is going to be critical. And so that would be another thing. There's all kinds of fines and other implications if your content isn't accessible. So that's the drawback of not investing in digital content. I'm keep us moving here because otherwise I'll just go on and on. I guess if Jessica, maybe we'll get to the meat of things to give our listeners some concrete actions around what you would do. Obviously, Ars Privacy is the company that you're a CEO of, so maybe it's best practices. But if you were running a hospital provider that had 50 different units, let's say, what are the things that you've seen that they should be looking for in a data platform? What are the requirements? What are the primary things that they're going to need in the first few months, in the first few years?
I look at a few different things. First is compliance. The compliance infrastructure, first and foremost, is a non-negotiable. So at your scale, at a hospital scale, one bad data decision by one person, and that means, placing a pixel where it shouldn't go. Like there are lawsuits that have come out that have found that pixels, like a Facebook pixel or a Google tracking pixel, were installed in their instance of MyChart. So imagine having that pixel in the most sensitive door between patient and the care that they're providing, and tracking that and sending back that data to Facebook, to Google that don't have a BAA in place. Those kinds of decisions or actions, even if they're not coming from a bad or, malicious place, it doesn't just create legal exposure, but it becomes a headline and it immediately erodes trust across your entire patient base. And so I bring that up because just I want to illustrate just how fragile that patient trust is between provider and all of what that provider is doing with our data, especially as data becomes more and more out there and patients need to feel control and trust with their provider that data is there. And so what I would look for is a platform that has a provable track record on HIPAA, on understanding how to be secure and privacy forward with your data, that gives audit trails, that gives user permissions that work at the enterprise level. And so that's why we built Ars Privacy the way that we did. We see compliance as the foundation of collecting data, not as something that we add on at the end, not something that we add on with just signing a BAA and calling it a day. Getting compliant, consented data into Ars Privacy and then treating it before it goes out is the foundation of what we do. So if you're a healthcare organization, looking for a company that focuses exclusively on healthcare, understands the healthcare use case, and takes data compliance, privacy really seriously, table stakes. We have to do that. Second, I would want a single platform that does as much as I possibly can to limit the data exposure across the tech stack. So instead of working with 50 different vendors and having all of the same data go to all of those 50 vendors, instead I might want to consolidate and have one source of truth, as you were saying, Zane, that my data comes in. I know that it's trusted. I know that it's consented. I know that I can do now with it what I need to do in a compliant way would be important. Also, not to mention when you're setting up all of these various pieces of the tech stack, you don't want to have to set up unifying that journey 50 different times, right?
Yeah.
So that's, again, what Ars Privacy is all about, is unifying the entire patient journey from landing page view through EHR in a compliant way. And then lastly, I would say work with someone who can support you. as you grow and who can truly be a partner to you. This is something that we really pride ourselves on, is getting to know each and every one of our clients, pairing you with a support team that understands your particular use case, whether that's I want to reach more patients through this particular channel, or I want to better understand how many people are coming to our website and where they're coming from and what they're doing when they spend time on us. We really pride ourselves on building a relationship with you as our client and understand deeply the healthcare need. And so,
Yep.
looking for a company that takes support and client success very seriously, not just from a retention perspective, but from a genuinely wanting to partner with you perspective, I think is really important too.
Yeah, Jessica, great points in there. I mean, the depth that you described, the importance of compliance infrastructure, I think I can see that in one of our listeners trying to sort through their requirements and making sure that that section has a deep list of requirements, all the way through to how the data gets actioned in a compliant way. But then, I think there is something in the growing world of SaaS, especially now and with the evolution of AI tools, of the human touch and how critical that is, especially in healthcare with providers who, understanding who their patients are and having someone who really cares deeply about patients is a differentiator. So I think great feedback on sort of the data angle of, if you were leading a 50-person hospital network. Zane, how about for you on the content side of things? Anything in particular that you called out? I know we covered a few different topics, but what would be critical in a content management system?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the compliance architecture, which is native to the system. So proper workflows, role-based approvals and permissions, audit trails, which basically means that the publishing compliant content is the default path and not like an extra work that you have to, send approval for and then wait on. And then the ability to manage multiple distinct experiences from like a single platform, which kind of shares, what I was alluding to earlier, also like a core content or source of truth, and then giving the local teams the flexibility to create unique experiences without having to, spin up separate instances in every case. And then, yeah, I think also what you said, Ryan, earlier, which is a proven track record. Hopefully, in healthcare, there's not a lot of room. As Jessica also mentioned, it takes one small decision from one person somewhere. So somebody with the proven track record of uptime, security, performance, compliance, all these things are absolutely fundamental to making technology decisions.
Yep, absolutely. Zane, I think you covered most of the thoughts that I had on my head on the content management side of things. Maybe the one thing that I would add is accessibility. Accessibility, and Jessica talked quite a bit about personalization. The ability to segment and personalize in a compliant way is, for most organizations, is an extension of both of the core platforms, data and content. So the actioning of those insights I think is something that we've heard over and over again from some of our clients. It's something that there's always in-depth discussions required, but it is critical. We talked a lot about the core platforms. We'd be living in a bubble if we didn't talk a little bit about AI. Um, in the conversations with a lot of our customers, it is on their minds. They're testing, they're building with it. It's not necessarily in production, but what would your expectations be around how AI is going to help accelerate both your content and your data strategy if you're a provider? Maybe they're not ready for the next 3 months, 6 months, but how should they be thinking about how AI is going to accelerate both of those core pillars here in the maybe next 2 years? Jessica, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. It's such an exciting time to be building and to see just how quickly AI is changing everything. I would say I'm overall very excited and also curious and a little, on edge is, I think, a good way of putting it.
Yep.
And I think AI's biggest unlock for healthcare marketing is doing more with lean teams. And that's so important for teams that are really small and, like I said, have a huge mandate to grow while maintaining compliance. So I think that now, when you think about marketing teams within healthcare who have previously been so limited to what they could do because they're so much smaller than, think about like a big CPG company that really marketing is a core feature or core, department for them.
Yep.
I think AI will unlock the ability to do more with a smaller team, but I think it's really important to be very thoughtful and thoughtful about what you're using AI to do when you're working in the healthcare context. So, what we're building at Ars Privacy is the way that we think about AI is that it should operate within an already compliant data environment. And so, that when you're using AI to do analytics or to do predictive intelligence around who we should target, that you're not sharing with these AI models who is seeking out what healthcare, right? Not sending PHI where it shouldn't go. So I think being very clear on what AI touches, what kind of data, and where in that patient journey you're actually incorporating AI is really important. And I think it would be, we of course want to leverage AI and move quickly and bring healthcare marketing into the modern era. And I would just also caution about AI is moving so quickly. And the data that healthcare marketers are dealing with and optimizing for is really sensitive data. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but like work with vendors who are built for healthcare and can help you maintain compliance while leveraging AI, because you don't want AI to make your marketers 10 times more efficient, but also introduce 10 more risk vectors, right? So finding that right balance of leveraging AI to get better analytics and figure out what works, but also making sure that we're still being very protective of patients' data and not introducing more risk or even any risk when using AI for that.
That's great. Zane, I'll pass it to you to close us out on this topic.
I'll also probably sound like a broken record in this time, but yeah, I think there's two immediate, I guess, impactful use cases for AI. And number one is it can absolutely tighten up your governance. It can enforce consistency, brand, tone of voice, and also, run compliance checks on your entire kind of content database. So it makes that far more efficient. And then the second piece where it can already we are seeing a lot of impact is, Ryan, something that you feel very passionately about, which is identifying content gaps. What are patients searching for? What are the interesting topics? It can definitely bring those insights within your kind of working environment in the CMS in our case. And then future pipe dream, which is definitely something close to my heart, is the personalization piece, which kind of is where content meets data, and which is what we're talking about. If you can have this compliant way of collecting, unifying, storing data with the consent layer on top, and then you can bring that data into your like experience platform, which is what we do, then you can definitely have AI from within your content repository, for lack of a better word, create those experiences, hopefully in a compliant way also, because you are working within that whole, workflows. And then also, the agentic AI can orchestrate those experiences for the patient. So basically, at the end of the day, making sure the right kind of content shows up in the right places at the right time, to use something that Jessica said earlier.
Yeah. Zane, you're right. The idea of filling content gaps. And I think, before this idea of, hey, if you go to Memorial Sloan Kettering, you're going to find everything that you want around whatever health condition you might have. But if you go to a local clinic that's a bit more rural and you go to their site, you might just find the ability to book an appointment with your GP. And I think that's changing. And so showcasing what might be expected with that GP versus with Memorial Sloan Kettering is going to be a big thing. And then how do you map that to the data? Going back to the consent layer, where else I may have had an experience, treatment, and then personalizing. I think that is the future. And then the agentic stuff, pulling it all together is wild, the world that we live in, but very, very exciting. So I know you both have been very generous with your time, Jessica, especially since you're away from your baby. And it's getting towards the end of the day. I thought maybe we could just pass it to each of you to give a few final words of advice to our listeners. We've covered a lot of topics, but maybe you can ground it with, what's a concrete step that they can take if they want to reignite the discussion around how they're managing their data to deliver better patient experiences, or how they're managing their content to deliver better patient experiences. What are the things that they might bring to leadership as a way to say, hey, we should restart this conversation?
Yeah, I would say three things, two tactical and one philosophical, so to speak.
Okay.
Number one is do a very quick scan of all of your digital properties just to get inventory on what you're actually doing when it comes to tracking. So, what you can do is there are various, even Chrome browser extensions, or you can go into the network tab of when you're on your site and see what scripts are firing. If through the browser extension or through the network tab, you see a Facebook pixel installed, or a Google tag installed, then that means that you're tracking data on your site and sending to Facebook or to Google. And there are a whole host of scripts that you could be running, and getting an inventory on what you're doing with the data and where it's going, first and foremost, is a really good place to start, because you can't fix what you don't know about. And you also might not know, if you're sitting in this corner of the organization, you might not know that this other team installed a pixel, and you need to know why that was installed, and if it needs to be installed, how you're actually going to do that from a compliant perspective. Number two is kind of switching gears. Outside of doing that inventory, work with compliance teams. So work with your legal and compliance teams very early and very often. I've seen healthcare orgs get excited about a new tool, start to go through the vendor selection process, sign the contract, start to deploy it, and then realize that you actually can't use it because you don't have a BAA in place, or they're not HIPAA compliant for your use case. Or you might find, okay, the vendor works, but the way that we were intending to work with this vendor, our compliance team doesn't sign off on. And you want to get that conversation, you want to get on the same page with your legal and compliance team early before you dive in, so that you're choosing the right vendor and you're going about the flow that you want to in the right way. And so that leads me to the philosophical point of view: is come at this from a how can we how can we view as an organization privacy and compliance as an advantage, as a moment to build a relationship with our patient, to build trust with our patient? How can we see that as an advantage and work that through our process as an advantage, as something that makes us stand out, as something that makes us proud about the way that we show up for our patients all throughout the user acquisition funnel? And I think approaching these decisions and approaching these flows with that in mind, that this can actually be a source of pride, not just a compliance checkbox that we have to do, can change the way that we make decisions and actually get to better analytics as a result.
Yeah, that's great. Jessica, thanks for those kind of very concrete things, but tying it back to this idea of consent as an advantage, something to lean into. That's a great thought for our listeners. And I'll let you wrap us up here with advice that you give for folks who are trying to kind of reignite the discussion around how they use content to deliver better patient experiences.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it high level. Obviously, not as in depth and technical as Jessica's, but simple questions for me. Number one, can your marketing team publish a content on your website 24 hours, or do you need to create a IT ticket? Because if that's part of your process, it's gonna it's gonna be tough catching up. Number two, do you have a single source of truth or content, or does your content live in various systems and it's fragmented? Number three, can you publish the same content across channels like website, mobile, and where else have you? And then I guess lastly, do you have a documented workflow for your content and it is enforced? I guess these are, for me, the right questions to ask. Again, content is definitely like a strategy now. It's a business model, actually. I like to say it's no longer marketing. It's literally the foundation of every business at this point. So for me, like, these are absolutely critical questions.
Zane, I love those questions because I can take those and I could, I'm thinking about some of our clients who become clients. We started the process. You can walk those questions into a CIO's office and say, would it be okay if it was your son or daughter who was trying to evaluate you as a provider and there was content that needed to get live and it took 2 weeks, or if the content that they received was outdated, or if they couldn't render it on their mobile device. Those are things that any CIO will recognize, hey, in my personal life in a consumer scenario, that would be completely unacceptable. And so why would that be acceptable when you're trying to make a critical decision around your own health? So Jessica, Zane, tremendous session. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we'll see you on the next episode of Real Talk, Real Trust soon.